Hello, welcome to the No Way Jose podcast. Today, we're continuing our series on the years of lead with Doc Inferno. We'll be talking today more about the Red Brigade, the influences, and some of the early kidnappings, and maybe get into a little bit more or a little bit less. We'll see. That's the game plan for today. With that, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you can see when I drop new episodes and when I'm going live. We'll see you in the show.
We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
Hello, Doc Inferno. Welcome back to the show. Ready to get into another one?
I am.
All right. Well, I guess we can just jump right into it. No, really. I thought about maybe doing like recaps or something like that. But if you're a part 3 in a series, I don't know. What are we doing recaps? You're probably watching this in a playlist all at once or something like that. Anyways, so we can kind of just jump right into it. Last episode, I think we were kind of like in the early foundations of the Red Brigades, kind of the college days, kind of the budding formation of what would be a beautiful little terrorist group or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And
the
now
anatomy
we're
of the terrorist group.
Yep, and now we're gonna kind of maybe kind of analyze the influence of it, kind of like where these ideas came from, and then maybe kind of get a little bit more into the early days of this. So you kind of jump in wherever you want, I guess. You're leading the show.
Okay. So to understand the Red Brigades, I think we need to rewind a little bit to a guy named Giacomo Feltinelli. And by the way, I forgive me, everybody, if I'm butchering a lot of these, Italian names. I don't speak Italian, quite unfortunately, but I think this guy is very pivotal to the emergence of the Red Brigade. So Giacomo Feltinelli, sometimes called the artistic Garibaldi. And if you don't have any reference on that, Garibaldi is considered to be the father of Italy during the Risorgimento, which is where, Italy sort of formed, all the different kingdoms formed into like the modern day nation of Italy. So Giacomo Feltinelli was born into a very prestigious family. He was born in Brescia, Lombardy in 1926 to aristocratic family, very wealthy. His grandfather was the most prominent timber merchant in Venice. That means he has a deep lineage that goes all the way back to the Venetian merchants. Mostly his early childhood was largely idyllic. It was spent mostly at his family's estate in Grangiano on the shores of Lago de Garda. And his father made a fortune on Lake Guardia as a lumber supplier in the heyday and of the industry and the railroad construction. His father was, of course, Carlo Feltinelli, one of the country's most critical financial representative, successful entrepreneur and president of many companies, including the Credito Italiano and Edison. And in case you're wondering where those institutions are, they are very prominent institutions that probably tie all the way into the Vatican Bank, which anybody that's familiar with Italian history knows about Michele Sidonia. He was one of the person that was involved in the Roberto Calvi scandal, and later, we might talk about that. So he continued on his father's international timber trade and construction and industrial business. He lost his father in 1935, and I should also mention that when Feltinelli came of age, Italy was under fascist rule, was under the rule of Mussolini at the time, and his mother was obsessed with the aristocracy. Now, there's some indications that perhaps his mother was probably cheating around on, as in many cases with a lot of the nobility, a lot of the aristocrats, they want to marry up. So this is what is interesting. Since he turned the age 12, he was granted a marquis by his mother. Being obsessed, he was granted a marquis by Benito Mussolini at age 12. Quite unfortunately, what happened is his father, at his early age, was killed himself, unalived himself, I should say, because of a scandal, because he got caught into some faulty dealership and some faulty kind of business endeavors. And so during the fascist occupation, Mussolini's regime assumed the ownership of most of the Feltinelli estate and Giacomo's. After, of course, like his father died, jumping a little ahead here, his mother decided to marry a reporter with a very prominent kind of, let's just say, news service in Italy. His name was Luigi Barzini. And so here's what's interesting. Here's where things get a little bit interesting, is that Feltinelli is known as being a communist and a Marxist revolutionary and largely an anti-fascist. But when he was of early age, he idolized Mussolini. He had all kinds of posters. He really wanted to be a squadrista, which is a person that was in the sort of fascist establishment. And this is what a journalist, Indro Montanelli, recalled. In the 1940s, he was a fascist. He was so fascist that in 1943, the armistice of Cassabili, he wanted to denounce both me and the stepfather, Luigi Barzini, for things we had said against the regime. Now, Feltinelli had a rather tumultuous relationship with his stepfather. He hated his stepfather, as a matter of fact. We kind of see that's sort of like in this history of a lot of the people dealing with either side of the fascist or the communist side. We see that both of them seem to have troubled kind of, upbringings. And he was largely neglected by his parents. As a matter of fact, both his mother and his stepfather, they both hated each other. And his mother, of course, joined with his stepfather and actually locked him away in a room and often didn't give him, proper food and water. So even though he came from quite privilege, we see quite early that he started to develop a kind of resentment towards his family. And this was so bad that he suffered like a claustrophobia. And as a teenager, he ran away from home, and he developed quite a sympathy for people that were help in the household. Maids, gardeners, etc. He started to see that there was kind of an inequality between the aristocracy, the rich, and himself. And as a teenager, he ran away from home, only to return if he was permitted to move in with the servants' quarter. As he spoke with and worked alongside the laborers, he recalled being exposed to another world, one that was not gilded, one which I lived. And this is a quote. I learned about the conditions, the uncomfortable life of the poor and struggles to maintain family. Meager pay and constant threat of unemployment hung over their heads. I understand there was two different and complete social classes. So what he decided to do, okay, I guess in defiance against his mother and his stepfather, is he decided to join the resistance against Mussolini's regime, and also conversely against the Nazis as well. So he enrolled in Palencio de Roma at the same time, and this is when he got older, taking classes during the day and participating in communist political activities at night. And during this time, Giacomo inherited 75% of his father's estate. He threw money into communist causes. He began to furiously collect documents and monographs of history of workers' movements, of Marxism, filling his apartment to the point where he decided to open the La Associazione Biblioteca Giacomo Feltinelli. Now, if you live in Italy, Feltinelli is still a publishing powerhouse. As a matter of fact, there are bookstores lined across Italy itself that bear his name and his likeliness. So, on November 1944, Giacomo, age 20, enrolled in the Legiano Combat Unit, a volunteer corps, second to the Fifth Army, and soon after joined the Italian Communist Party. Giulianisa was scandalized by the company he kept. Having a communist for a son, that's his mother, was tantamount to having a son with the plague. A few months later, she took herself and the family silver off to Rio de Janeiro. And you have to understand, like during those times, Italy was largely, I would say, still a very fascist country. It was a fascistic country. It was. What's interesting, and let me just go into a little bit of politics a little bit for people that are unacquainted. Mussolini himself, what started out as a socialist, he kind of had this dichotomy where he wanted to be a socialist, but at the same time, he wanted to be a nationalist. And this is kind of verboten if you are a socialist. And this is kind of interesting because this is, I think, a lot of the confusion that comes today from, there's a lot of intersection there between sort of right-wing factions within anarchism, socialism, people like Bombaci, etc., that existed in this milieu, to where it formed this sort of uneasy sort of alliance. And at the same time, when Mussolini took power in Italy, he had this uncomfortable sort of alliance, you could say, with both the Vatican, which, if people are familiar with a lot of Italian history, and really European history, is there's always been this sort of uncomfortable divide between the nation state and also with the Vatican itself. So this sort of plays out. I think the mystic and philosopher Julius Evola, who's a very controversial figure, talks about the Guelph and the Ghibelline. That's the Holy Roman Empire versus the Vatican and the Church State. And Feltinelli, because he was of such high rank and high birth, this put him at odds because he was showing sympathies towards the communist. And this plays out all throughout European history, and even to the formation of, you could say, what we call the extreme right in European history. So this, like I said, brought quite a shame on his family. And at the time also, there was a kind of burgeoning mainstream communist party that was also forming at the same time. And Giacomo later on will distance himself even from that and become even more extreme and more devoted. So after the war efforts, when Italy was occupied by the Allied forces, he saw that his influence was sort of waning. So let's go back to 1951. So more than 2 million Italians were members of the Partito Comunista Italiano, part of the tide of allegiance that was lapping over the shores throughout Europe. And his publishing house this is also around the time when he established his publishing house. It was largely an anti-fascist publishing house, advocated of freedom of thought while remaining prominent platform for Marxism. Feltrinelli's first two titles were Lord Russell's The Scourge of the Swastika, A Short History of Nazism, War Crimes, and the Autobiography of the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. The international outlook remained essential to Giacomo's vision for the company as he jetted around the world looking for promising manuscripts. And because Giacomo was such a privileged aristocrat, this gave him a sort of ability to foment revolutions, to start revolutions, to also throw his weight in with other people, and like I said, at the time there was a lot of tumultuous type of going-ons in Italy. So this is rather interesting. He chanced upon the Boris Pasternak manuscript of Dr. Zhivago. Yes, that Dr. Zhivago. That would later be turned into a movie starring Omar Sharif. Now, the problem is that during the time of the Soviet Union, I believe this was during the changeover from Stalin to Nikita Khrushchev, this particular manuscript provided a kind of critical view of the Soviet Union, and this put him at odds with the Communist Party. And there were a lot of people at that time that decided after the fall of Stalin whether they wanted to still side with the USSR. And largely, this was because of what was called the Hungarian Revolution, to where I believe the USSR sent people into Hungary at the time to suppress revolts. And there was a lot of abuse, a lot of atrocities. And Feltrinelli did not agree with this particular thing. He felt like the people in the USSR was betraying the revolution. And the author himself this was quite of an indictment against the Khrushchev regime. And the author, of course, was terrified of the possible repercussions, but agreed to go ahead. And of course, Feltrinelli beat both US and France to the first publishing. He would make a killing. This would already add more money and more to his war chest. And of course, he decided also to publish the controversial The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi del Lampenosa, and also a Italian edition of Henry Miller's The Tropic of Cancer in 1962. So this was his first militant turn. Soviets were putting heavy pressure on Italian communists to keep Dr. Zhivago from being published. Il Giangi had to fend off accusations of betrayal of his comrades. His role in the Communist Party was limited due to his elite roots. He wanted to play a larger role in the Communist organization. Giacomo was horrified, like I mentioned, about the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Student-led protests toppled the government. Politburo sent in troops and ranks and massacred thousands of citizens. Giacomo felt like the spirit of the communist revolution had been betrayed. Now, at the same time, he was also cozying up to what was going on in Latin America at the time and what was going on in what is classically kind of known as the Third World, now what people call the Global South. He fell in love with the Tupamaros, the Bolivian Revolution, and of course, he made a connection to Che Guevara. As a matter of fact, the famous sort of photograph of Che Guevara that's on T-shirts and many, you could say, disillusioned college revolutionaries was that famous picture of Che. That famous picture of Che where he is wearing the hat with the star. That was largely the work of Giacomo Feltinelli. And at the same time, he was developing a taste for the urban guerrilla. He was developing a taste for the Tupamaros. And of course, for another urban guerrilla by the name of Abraham Gillian, and also Carlos Magagilia, and who wrote the mini manual of urban guerrilla, considered to be sort of a classic in revolutionary literature. And this, of course, provided the impetus and the manuscripts for the Red Brigades. He also formed his own in later times, around in 1970, of the Grupia de Associazione Partigiana, the GAP, the GAP, which was an underground paramilitary organization with strong Marxist tendencies. And like I said, he modeled off the Tupamaros. 1964 to 1968, following the acquisition of the iconic Alberto Corda photo of Che Guevara, Feltinelli traveled to Bolivia to establish links with guerrilla movements and met Regis Debray. And Regis Debray was sort of this liaison to Che Guevara himself. And during this time, when he actually traveled to Bolivia, and during this time, he was tailed by security forces. That meant the CIA. Feltinelli was arrested and questioned by the CIA and eventually expelled from Bolivia after spending 1 day and 2 nights in jail. Now, he didn't just travel to Bolivia. He also traveled to the Czech Republic. And also what Feltinelli was doing at the same time was, because he was able to evade so many people, and this is possible speculation on my part, this has never been proven, and I have to be very careful with like these speculations because I try to be as accurate as I can when it comes to telling the story of Feltinelli, is that he traveled to the Czechoslovakia, and during that time, the Czech Republic, or the Czech Republic, I believe it was called at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong. At that time, he allegedly was running guns. Feltinelli already had a penchant for guns. And yes, you'll see later that largely a lot of the Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries, such as the Red Brigades, and by the way, it wasn't just the Red Brigades that were the only Marxist-Leninists in town. There was the Prima Linea, front line. There was also the NAP, which largely established itself in prisons in Italy at the time. But he was most definitely trading in weaponry. And potentially that's where later time, when we talk about the Scorpion gun, the famous gun that potentially killed Aldo Moro and also was used by the Red Brigades and some of their other exploits, we can see that it traces back to the Czech Republic. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Scorpion gun, Jose?
It sounds familiar. I remember it being like, wasn't it like something exotic about it, that essentially that like a lot of people imply that perhaps there's like an intel connection or something. Am I correct here? I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're sort of correct. Mainly it was developed for, Marxist-Leninist type of revolutionaries. It was a very compact gun. It looks almost like a pistol and a semi-automatic weapon. And by the way, I just want to say at the same time, I disavow violence. I'm not encouraging violence, but it is essential that we talk about weaponry and guerrilla warfare when we talk about the Red Brigades, because it is very vital to some of the events that correspond to some of their actions. So yeah, the Scorpion gun is a small kind of compact weapon. It's developed sort of for urban type of warfare. It's meant to be like small and compact, and if you see it, it's a very distinct looking weapon. It's a very, very distinct looking weapon. I don't believe it's manufactured anymore. It's probably a collector's at this point. Now, what's interesting about this, okay, is that in Bolivia, okay, there was this woman by the name of Monica Ertel. And what's interesting about her is her background. Well, her father was a guy who did Nazi propaganda. And her father had fled to Bolivia, like so many Nazis at the time, and had settled there. They had this like colony. And matter of fact, her father was good friends with Klaus Barbie, who also had a CIA connect. Kind of interesting. Klaus Barbie pops up in the picture. But at the time, they were hunting Che Guevara in South America. This was around, I believe, somewhere around the late 60s when they finally tailed Che Guevara. And Klaus Barbie was used by the CIA, and so there was another guy named Colonel Roberto Quintanilla. He was a Bolivian army official who ordered the execution of Che and cut off his hands. He, alongside with Klaus Barbie, made the execution of Che Guevara. A very famous sort of picture, I believe. They took pictures of, of them basically with Che with his hands cut off, like he was a war prize. Well, Monica Ertel, she developed some sympathy for the Bolivian resistance, and
Wait,
she was a member of.
Real quick,
Go ahead.
I wanted to show just because we were talking about it. This is a Scorpion right here for the audio people. Sorry, it is what it is. You'll have to look up
That's
yourself.
fine.
A CZ Scorpion VZ61E if you want to look it up. Scorpion with a K, and this is what it is. It is kind of like an exotic looking thing. I mean, you see these in like kind of I don't know, mobster movies and stuff,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah, that's kind of like what you think of. But yeah, it's obviously like a little foldable, little shoulder thing and kind of like a submachine gun. But a little itty bitty guy. Yeah. So, but sorry.
Weapon.
Yeah, but
Yeah, no, you're
yeah.
fine.
But go ahead. Sorry.
It was a
I know a little
weapon.
bit. We had kind of moved on, but we were talking about it, so I figured show it. And so I would assume the key thing here is it's not a normal weapon that's usually had. So it's kind of
No.
the usage of it kind of denotes, the where it's being proliferated from. So, but
Yes. And I believe that connection is Feltinelli, because later times it's alleged that Mario Moretti, who we talked about in the last episode, who had some quite really sus connections, used it to kill Aldo Moro. I mean, that's all hypothetical. But Mario Moretti was quite proud of killing Aldo Moro. If you listen to some of his confessions that he made in prison. So anyway, she was a member of the FLN, the Matononio Liberation Army, and she in April 1st, 1971, murdered Colonel Robert Quintanilla in Hamburg using the pistol provided by Feltinelli, who is known to support these movements. And I thought that was an interesting note. I've kind of jumped around in the timeline a little bit, but I thought that was interesting to note. I actually discovered that when I was researching Feltinelli, and I thought that was a really, really interesting connection, considering like the intelligence links that some people in the Red Brigades and what Alberto Francisini accuses certain people of having. And, of course, the connection we talked about at the Hyperion Language School that sort of ties into the whole Czech Republic training. And it wasn't just the Red Brigades that was connected to that particular training camp. It was also the PLO. It was also Carlos the Jackal. It was also, of course, the Bader Meinhof, who were Blanquist type Marxist revolutionaries as well. And I thought that was really interesting. So here's the fate of Monica. Monica was eventually killed in special forces. She was tortured, and her body was never found. They never recovered her body, which probably decayed in some South American rainforest. Now, another thing that was interesting about Feltinelli is that he was an aspiring revolutionary. So he wanted to turn the island of Sardinia, and Sardinia has quite an interesting history in itself. It was sort of a province that was incorporated into Italy, but it's had a long sort of resistance movement there, and it's tried to vie for its independence. So he was also trying to turn Sardinia into the Italian version of Cuba. And I should also mention he met with Fidel Castro. He idolized Fidel Castro. He idolized Che, and he was inspired by the revolution that was going on in Cuba at the same time. And this goes to the Tupamaros, which I want to touch upon, because the Tupamaros were very essential to the foundations of the Red Brigades. It was founded in 1963 by Raul Sendic. The group drew its inspiration from a Cuban revolution and was named after the 18th century Incan rebel Tupac Amaru II. Raul Sendic Ignacio was born in a peasant family and joined the Socialist Party of Uruguay during the 1950s. He worked as a rural trade union and founded a number of organized sugarcane workers and the Artigas department. He led demonstrations in the capital of Montevideo, calling for an 8-hour day land reform, robbed banks, gun stores, takeovers, and police and military installations, and the assassinations of Uruguayan foreign officials. And the Tupamaros themselves were more successful at kidnapping than even the Red Brigades were, because they kidnapped, I believe, a British statesman and held him for over 3 months. The Tupamaros were so severe that one of their mentors, Abraham Gillian, who fought in the Spanish Civil War, condemned them for their violence. And this goes to Abraham Gillian. He was a major influence on the Tupamaros' version of urban guerrilla warfare. And I want to mention something about war historians mention about urban guerrilla warfare. It's kind of controversial because most of the revolutions that were staged around that time period, with Mao and also with Che Guevara, followed a different kind of system than the urban guerrilla. But Abraham Gillian, and this is interesting for all the war historians out there, typically urban warfare is considered to be largely unsuccessful. It's never been successfully done that I know of overthrowing any kind of governments or installing any new governments. It's largely been unsuccessful. But a lot of people think, because of the growing kind of trend, the way that things are going across the world, that most of the centralized civilization and infrastructure is within the urban areas. So if you want to be a revolutionary, you have to seize upon this opportunity. So he believed that urban center was a true nexus of revolution, as opposed to the rural countryside, which is where Mao and Che Guevara mainly did most of their revolution. And he also came from the Spanish Revolution. He joined militias and found himself on the front during the siege of Madrid. After the dissolution of the anarchist militias into regular armies, he fought in a column commanded by anarchist brigadier Cripian Mera. He fought until the end of the war, and he was finally captured by Franco. He was sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted to 10 years. He escaped in 1941, but was captured, and then he escaped again and made it successfully to France. He immigrated to Argentina, and this was during the time of the Perón era. He worked as an editor for the magazine Economy and Finance using a pseudonym. His dissident writings on economics became world famous after he influenced the Argentine Congress to vote against the policies that were being pushed by the country by the USA. 1962, he left Argentina and made his home in Montevideo. While in Uruguay, Gillian made contact with the Anarchist Federation of Uruguay, the FAU, the longest-standing anarcho-communist group in history, who articulated the Espismo School of Anarchism. Gillian founded armed revolutionary groups in Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And unlike the Marxist guerrillas active in South America, the OPR 33 had a complete focus on working with defending mass movements. Their main focus was the protection of wildcat strikes, factory occupations, demonstrations, in which they were influenced by the mass politics and roots of the Spanish CNT and the model of the Defense Committee. The OPA 32's most famous act would be the kidnapping of a major Uruguayan capitalist during an industrial dispute. Now, what's interesting also about Abraham Gillian is that he felt that to have a successful revolutionary movement, you had to have patience. Meaning you had to have the full devotion of the people that you were defending. And he felt like the Tupamaros themselves did not have this, and that the Tupamaros sort of overcalculated their influence in Uruguay and were largely unsuccessful because of this. So he believed in having a little bit of temperance when it came to the revolutionary movement. And like I said, his manuals are not widely known to most people, and it's not studied as much as Mao or by Che, but they were vital to the Red Brigades because Feltinelli was one of the people who translated his works alongside with another Brazilian Marxist revolutionary by the name of Carlos Magilha. And excuse me if I'm butchering this name, but Carlos himself was not successful either. But was during that time Brazil was under a dictatorship, so you can kind of see that the Red Brigades mindset, even though I believe they were an organic Italian phenomenon, they sort of channeled, as in like the 60s, late 60s and 70s, a lot into the global South and a lot into guerrilla warfare. And what's interesting about a lot of these texts, if you were to look at them and you were to examine them, they pretty much have instructions on, stuff that is taboo and verboten. If it was done by anybody else, it would be considered taboo and verboten. It has actually guns to use. It has stuff like, I don't want to get you taken off YouTube, but it has like very spicy stuff within. It almost functions kind of as a manual. And I'm actually going to read, if you don't mind,
Go for it.
some stuff from. Go ahead.
I was just telling you to go for it. Although, real quick, I guess I smirked. I don't know if you caught me smirking a little bit ago. I was just recalling. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, what do I remember the Tupamaros from? And I remember. I feel like we should mention it in passing, just because it's a fun little anecdote about the group. It's probably the only thing I really have known them for. The assassination of Dan Mitrione.
I was going to mention him. I'm glad you brought him up because I was going to mention him. Now, Dan Mitrione is an interesting case. The reason why he fell on the radar of the Tupamaros is largely because it was believed he was an FBI kind of asset or working as a statesman, teaching the Uruguayan police force torture techniques.
You wouldn't be able to guess how that guy died now, would you guys? A little bit of a cosmic irony, just a little bit of foreshadowing right there, but go on.
Yeah, I'm just saying he was teaching the Uruguayan, and it's alleged there's a movie called The State of Siege, which I do recommend, whether, whatever your political inclinations are, whatever you are on like the, on the political meter, I definitely recommend, I should say spectrum. I do recommend you check out the movie State of Siege, because State of Siege was a movie produced in 1972. It's considered to be a parapolitical classic. It was made by a guy named Cosa Veras. Um, he developed this like script around the Tupamaros where they would kidnap the official, which is supposed to be modeled off Matrioni. And they held him in, of course, the people's prison that the Red Brigades will later model themselves after. They will, of course, kidnap, cappies, which are these middle management type people in these industrial factories. He'll model that after them, and they'll basically do the same thing that he did to. In the movie, he's taking homeless people from Uruguay, and he's pretty much teaching people, the government's torture techniques. So it's kind of interesting all the stuff that was going on in South America at the time. It looks like they were priming the South American, nations, and for some kind of operation. As we know, later times, that's when, of course, there's all these different right wing sort of squads that are sponsored by the CIA that are put down there to install governments, put governments into power that are more sympathetic to America. And of course, in the backyard, we have Bolivia. Of course, Bolivia plays a major factor in all this with Klaus Barbie, with the drug trade. So it's rather interesting that sort of the poetic, I guess, justice that Dan Matrioni ends up, being tortured. So
couldn't happen to a better person.
I would say, yes, CIA spook down there meddling in, the affairs of they really shouldn't have been meddling into. So if you haven't seen the movie, I do recommend it. The Tupamaros is an interesting phenomenon because, like in many cases, the Uruguay has an interesting demographic. I should mention, I don't want to get too deep into this, but Uruguay has an interesting demographic. Matrioni also was Italian American. Uruguay largely has an indigenous population. It also has a European population. And surprisingly, a lot of the Tupamaros were of European descent. They relied heavily, of course, upon the indigenous population for support. But a lot of the people there that were the revolutionaries were largely European, Italian, and Spaniard descent. And I thought that was an interesting factor. So I don't know how organic the Tupamaros are, to be quite honest with you, because what's interesting is that I was actually discussing with you last time that the Patty Hearst kidnapping, which ties into America, they modeled themselves also. The SLA modeled themselves also after Tupamaros. So it must have been a pretty prevalent thing in the New Left to sort of perform these kidnappings and kidnap these industrialists. So how organic that is, I don't know, but it does seem to be fomented. And Uruguay at the time was undergoing really stagnant inflation at the time. I should mention that also. It was considered also to be the Switzerland of South America. It was like considered to be a great place of industry, a great place that had this fostering economy, but also a lot of inequality at the same time. So there was kind of a lot of deadlock like there was in Italy at the time. So that's what kind of breeds a lot of extremism, when there's a lot of deadlock and sort of democracy locks itself and people don't have that much mobility. So that's interesting. That's an interesting fact about the Tupamaros. Jose, why don't you tell people how Matrioni died? Why don't you tell the people?
I actually don't remember offhand the specifics. I just know the cliff notes that the guy was. It's just like the cosmic irony of that this guy was a CIA spook that was training in torture, and he was like abducting homeless people for Uruguay police and torturing them and stuff. And then next thing you know, and all obviously to go after these groups like the Tupamaros, and then ironically he gets abducted and captured. Now I don't remember how he dies specifically. I don't know. You want to tell us?
I don't know. It's especially either. I didn't really honestly look that far into Dan Matrioni, but I do know that he had like some really suspicious connections, and like he was definitely teaching the states torture techniques. which, it's kind of interesting where exactly he learned those torture techniques from. I mean, who knows exactly? But anyway, that's
Yeah,
the
there's so many
Tupamaros.
different CIA manuals on torture that goes back to, and then it attributes to one to the other to the other. There's a great coverage of it in Aberration in the Heartland of the Real that goes into all that. But yeah, they've been doing torture since day one. It seems like. All right, so we're talking influences today. It sounds to me like you might be kind of getting to an ending point. Not to throw a wrench in your plans, but I actually feel like we may as well just make this a whole ass influence episode, because I'm looking at the time and I'm like, I don't know if it would really even make sense to try to squeeze in kidnapping stuff. So I don't know if you have more that you have prepared, but I do feel like there's a little bit more meat in the bone, because we did talk about, like, I think I don't know if this is behind the scenes or if this is during the episode or what, but we had kind of talked about like the era, and that's and that's kind of presented itself in this episode a little bit here, in the era, and kind of like these ideas have kind of percolated out as a result. Like, we even just mentioned the stuff going on over in America. We also have like going on over in Vietnam, like with the Viet Cong. I mean, you had what, the Chinese Revolution roughly in
Yes.
that time period as well. So I mean, I do think there's probably some more meat in the bone that we could probably pick at for influences if you wanted to, instead of trying to make this into a two-pronged episode and maybe just keep it one topic. But I guess I don't know if you have more prepared that you want to talk about specifically, but otherwise, I know there's plenty that we could riff off of in there if you're interested.
Let me just read this from the mini manual of the Urban Guerrilla. And, this manual is still influential to this day, despite it not, having a successful track record. So let me just read a little bit.
Mhm.
And I want to warn the audience, I don't endorse this. I'm not endorsing this. I'm just simply saying this is something that was written by Carlos Magella. This is what he said about ambushes, which is largely how the Tupamaros, and largely also how Aldo Moro was probably kidnapped, quite military style. It says right here, ambushes are attacks typified by a surprise when the enemy is trapped across a road, or when he makes a police net surrounding the house or estate. A false message can bring the enemy to a spot where he falls into the trap. The principal object of the ambush technique is to capture enemy arms and punish him with death. Ambushes to halt passenger trains are for propaganda purposes, and when they are troop trains, the object is to annihilate the enemy and to seize the arms. The urban guerrilla sniper is a kind of a fighter especially suited for ambush because he can hide easily in the irregularities of the terrain and the rooftops of buildings and apartments and under construction, from windows in dark places, and can take careful aim at his chosen target. Ambushes have devastating effects on the enemy, leaving him unnerved, insecure, and fearful. And later it talks, and basically, this is a manual, a how-to manual that Feltinelli was translating into Italian and disseminating not just to the Red Brigades, but to all of the Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries. Now, Feltinelli doesn't have a bad reputation amongst his comrades. What they kind of think he is, they think he's like a playboy, an eccentric, sort of Renato Curcio called him a type of romantic, meaning that he wanted to be part of the action. And Feltinelli, by the way, later in 1972, tries to set off a bomb in Milano and a pylon, and it ends up being a catastrophe, which has led to a lot of different conspiracy theories about Feltinelli, thinking that maybe the State Department, because the State Department themselves were working a lot with the fascists at the time, like the Ordine Nuovo and people like Stefano della Chiaia, and they were plotting various different terrorist events. But it's believed that Feltinelli was just sort of an adventurous guy, and he set off the bomb in the pylon and sort of killed himself, unalived himself, I should say, sort of using the same techniques. Let me say for street tactics. Street tactics are used to fight the enemy in the streets, utilizing the participation of the masses against him. In 1968, the Brazilian students used excellent street tactics against police troops, such as marching down the street against traffic, utilizing slings and marbles as arms against the mounted police. Other street tactics consist in constructing barricades, pulling up paved blocks and hurling them at police, throwing bottles, bricks, paperweights, and other projectiles on top of the apartment and office buildings against the police, using buildings under construction. This definitely sounds like some kind of sabotage manual. It's kind of interesting. Sort of these techniques have played out in American streets as well. The Redneck Revolt, I believe, even used the mini manual of the urban guerrilla as well. It's equally necessary to know how to respond to enemy tactics. When the police troops come protected with helmets, defend themselves against flying objects, we have to divide ourselves into teams, one to attack the enemy from the front and the other attack in the rear, withdrawing one as the other goes into action to prevent the first becoming a target for projectiles. And you get the gist of that. I wanted to read something of the War of the Nerves. I actually wanted to read War of the Nerves if I can find it. That's what I wanted to read. They even go into about terrorism right here. Is that terrorism is an action usually employs the placement of a bomb or fire explosion to great destructive power, which is capable of affecting irreparable loss against the enemy. Terrorism requires that urban guerrillas should have adequate theoretical and practical knowledge to make explosive. I won't go into that. But oh, here we go. The War of the Nerves.
I'm pretty open here, but let's not lay out the specifics of how to make explosives.
I get it. They're not. It's not specific. It's not that specific. You can buy this on Amazon or eBay. It's not like a forbidden text. I think we still got the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I just think YouTube may not be as understanding.
I get it. That's what I'm saying. I don't want you to lose your channel.
I'm not too worried about it. I'm just being silly mostly, but that is the sort of thing they might get uppity about.
So let's talk about the War of the Nerves. The War of the Nerves are psychological war is an aggressive technique based on the direct or indirect use of mass means of communication and news transmitted orally in order to demoralize the government. And I should also emphasize that that was very much a technique of not just the Tupamaros, but the Red Brigades as well. The Red Brigades, when they would kidnap people, especially industrialists, they would put, of course, signs on them. They would sort of plot out how to, they would scout people, and I should mention also the Red Brigades had a lot of the support from the factory workers. That's primarily where they got a lot of their support from. Their support was from the workers. So they were following Abraham Galilean's sort of instruction. They did have some of the will of the people, and that terrified some of the Italian government at the time. So anyway, the War of the Nerves or psychological war is an aggressive technique based on direct or indirect use of mass means of communication and news transmitted orally in order to demoralize the government. In psychological warfare, the government is always at a disadvantage, since it imposes censorship on the mass media and winds up in a divisive position by not allowing anything against its filter through. At this point, it becomes desperate, is involved in greater contradictions and loss of prestige, and loses time and energy, exhausting effort to control, which is subject to being broken at any moment. The object of the War of the Nerves is to misinform, spreading lies among the authorities in which everyone can participate, thus creating an air of nervousness, discredit, insecurity, uncertainty, and concern on the part of the government. The best methods used by the urban guerrilla in the War of the Nerves are the following: using the telephone and the mail to announce false clues to police and government, including information of, there we go, any other act of terrorism in office, and assassination plans. So basically, this is largely an instruction manual, as you can see, and it's something you can buy on eBay or Amazon. I'm not encouraging anybody. I'm just saying simply that this is what Feltonelli was translating. So you guys sort of got a peek into and believe me, there's like much more spicier stuff than that the Red Brigades were into. So let me rewind a little bit and go a little bit into Red Brigade. Let me just briefly touch upon Red Brigade history, since I've sort of went over their influences. And I know we're like pressed for time, but okay. So Renato Curcio and Margarita Cagul have, of course, cemented themselves in college. They built up a following of factory workers. They decided to take their show on the road to Turin and, of course, to a place called Reggio Emilia. And this is like a major point to where they start building up a basis. They initially model themselves as being Maoist. They become members of this sort of mysterious Maoist organization called the PCI, which a lot of people don't know who exactly backed that particular, that particular Maoist movement. Some people believe, and I want to say also that there's another shadowy figure by the name of Claudio Muti, who I will discuss later in the series, that's connected to none other than the infamous Franco Freda, who did the Piazza Fontana bombing. And so it's a little bit speculation. See, because at the time there, that in the strategy of tension, they were trying to frame everything on the Maoist, especially the more radical Marxist-Leninist groups. They were trying to frame everything. So they got a lot of people like Stefano Della Chiesa and some of the people to do wheat paste posters of Maoist kind of propaganda. And this was contemporary, of course, with the Piazza Fontana. So they go into Turin, they start this group, they become a member of this group, and then they largely, I think, Renato Curcio gets kicked out of this group, mainly because he's a bit of a hothead and he sort of wants to go to the beat of his own drum. And also they form this group called the Metropolitan Collective. And the Metropolitan Collective is the fusion basically of the Turin, what would become the Turin cell, and also the Reggio Emilia cell as well, where they meet, of course, Alberto Francini. And a lot of the earlier people that I mentioned, like Simeone, that were a part of the Hyperion School were there as well, which sort of, would probably set off red flags to a lot of people. And what happens also is Mario Moretti doesn't pop back up in the picture until 1972, when they perform their first kidnapping, which is rather minor compared to the other kidnappings they plan on staging. So anyway, they form the Metropolitan Collective, and later they take the emblem of the five-pointed star of the Tupamaros. They, of course, put a rifle, which is also presented in this Cuban magazine that was being circulated by Feltinelli as well. And they make their emblem, of course, a rifle and a five-pointed star. And they decide to call themselves the Red Brigades later on, and they start putting out publications of the Sinista Proletaria, which is becomes sort of the de facto sort of publication for Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries in Italy at the time. And Francini, of course, having deep roots in Marxist-Leninist revolution, also joins teams with them as well. And this is their own creation, by the way. They're no longer part of the PCI, but they're known as the Metropolitan. And Francini's particular group is called the Apartment. That's all it is. Basically, people meeting up in apartments in Turin and Reggio Emilia, and deciding to what their next move is going to be. And their next move, of course, is going to be, let's go kidnap some industrialists. They're not quite that bold at first. What they start out doing is they basically start out making these sort of makeshift explosives and start burning cars of the Capi, or the middle management people, and Simeons, this major industrial. So they start basically burning cars, which is not just the trademark of a lot of the Red Brigades themselves, but it's also we see later fascist groups and even anarchist groups in the modern day, such as the Greek anarchist, still do this. It's still like for some reason to burn cars as an act of defiance against the establishment. And they of course get emboldened by this because they are not showing up on the radar for whatever reason. Of course, this also, they do a lot of bold moves. They this one guy who's a member of them named Marco Passetti. Marco Passetti is also an interesting character because he basically in later times turned state against the Red Brigades and blows their cover and reveals a lot of their hideout spots. And it's from there that they have to go underground. And do you want me to get into Marco Passetti, or do we have enough time to really go into like his background?
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to gauge how much time. I mean, I'm not trying to stick around here for more than another half hour. I know we're in the kidnapping, so I don't know how dense some of the earlier kidnapping. So that's your choice. You tell me. So, huh? Go ahead. Sorry, what'd you say? Did I lose you? Doc, you there? That was odd. What the heck just happened? This is yeah, there you are. That was weird. Okay. Well, okay. Sorry. You just completely went out. I don't know if you heard me the whole time there. You there? Oh, I just heard you say hello. That was weird. Well, the internet may have just made up our minds. Oh, you there? Is it me that was acting up? Because my thing just glitched. Huh.
Okay, before I close this out, let me just get into Marco Passetti.
Can you hear real quick? Can you hear me?
Or Passetta.
Can you hear me? Because I can hear you.
So Marco Passetta was an electrical engineer, and he was also a mountain guide. He was active in left-wing movements. And around 1968, he met with Ronaldo Curcio in Trento, which meant he was part of the original sort of nucleus of the Red Brigades. And it's this in 1969, he participated in attacks against the IMPS headquarters. And on April 11th, 1969, against the building of the Trento region, and after he was caught, he absconded, and he was helped to hide in Milan. And in 1970, he turned himself in and was sentenced to 3 years, but he only served partial sentence. In 1972, he moved to Milan and he joined the Red Brigades.
All right, can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I can hear you. I hear you just fine. Can you hear me? No?
Hello?
No? This is so bizarre. All right. Okay.
I lost sound. That was weird.
All right, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Let me see if I can come back in.
Can you hear me? I mean, I swear I'm working. You must be your headphones or something. That must be what it is. All right, Doc, you there?
I'm here.
All right, I don't know what that was. It must have been your headphones or something, or whatever you're using for
I
your.
couldn't hear you.
Yeah, because I heard you fine. So I'm like, am I tripping? So I think I was there the whole time. Sorry, I know that threw things off. So I don't know. Okay, a little. Is there what else? What else do you want to cover? Sorry, I know this is a little bit ham-fisted, but you know the audio threw us for a loop, and so I'm kind of like trying to Like where
But I
we're
just
at.
wanted,
What do you want to
I did
cover?
cover it. I did cover it. I covered Marco Pacetta,
Mm-hmm.
who was
Yeah.
basically an informant who that was pretty much it at the time. Basically, all I wanted to add to that was that he, when he was apprehended, off the first attack by the Red Brigades, he pretty much absconded and turned back up and joined them again in their new collective and revealed later in 1972 all of their hideouts. And there's a whole ordeal and story about that, which I'll probably cover next time.
Okay. Well, I guess let's bring it to an end, unless there's something specifically you really want to get into. Mostly just the technical difficulties kind of made it feel like a natural wrapping up point. But if there, obviously, I don't know if there what all exactly you want to cover. Obviously, we can wrap a lot of this into next episode. So if there's something specifically you want to hit, feel free to pull an audible and let me know. I'm just a little the technical difficulties kind of through the whole tempo
It
off.
was
So, but
it was probably me reading the mini manual to Urban Gorilla that threw it off. But
perhaps. But you tell me if there's anything else that you feel like we should squeeze in here for this episode. Kind of influences a little bit of kind of setting the stage for early kidnapping stuff and kind of getting into the exploits of the Red Brigade. But if there's anything else narrative-wise you feel like seems fitting to squeeze into this episode as opposed to the next, or if you want to, you're welcome to. But otherwise, go ahead and drop your plugs, brother.
all right, I want to thank you for bringing me on, Jose, to talk about the influences of the Red Brigade and the continuing Years of Lead saga. Much appreciated. I think I've covered all the bases here, and I hope the audience sort of gleaned something from this, despite the technical difficulties. Yeah, pretty much I talked about Feltinelli. He was very pivotal to the formation of a lot of the Marxist Leninist revolutionary groups, and he provided a lot of the impetus for the Red Brigades, primarily by being both a quasi revolutionary and participant, and also was sort of a nexus, I would say, between the aristocracy and also to revolution in the Red Brigades. And we learned a lot about some of his background and some of the sus characters of Feltinelli. Who's to say if a lot of people just think he was sort of a dopey, goofy type of romantic, and some people may have say he's like a bad actor. Who knows? Quite frankly, about the whole ordeal. But he was instrumental and very pivotal to the ongoing saga of the Red Brigades, which, in my opinion, I think should probably be made into a movie. I don't know who exactly would direct it, but I know it would probably be a point of view from various different members of the Red Brigade, and probably be a non-linear type of structure when discussing it.
Need to be a limited series, I think. I don't think a movie build really capture it too well.
I don't think so.
I don't know. You know better than I do, but it seems like a lot going on. So I don't know if it really lends itself well to the normal like 3-act structure of a movie. So, but perhaps I'm wrong.
I was like something like maybe an elongated form to where it sort of has a non-linear type of storyline. Because that's pretty much what the Red Brigades and a lot of stuff of the Years of Lead is. It's a lot of puzzle pieces, a lot of moving parts that are ongoing at the same time. You have so many actors, from the fascists to the Marxist-Leninists to the State Department, that's just playing on so much melodrama that's just unfolding between all the different sequences. So I hope that I've covered the bases when it comes to the Red Brigades and their sort of early influences. I want to thank the audience that's started appreciating this series, and also to you, Jose. And you guys can check me out at my YouTube, of course, Demento Mori, where I discuss esoterica, parapolitics, crime, and all the intrigue that comes with the Years of Lead.
All right, for those who want to support what I'm doing, you leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, all the major audio podcatchers, and Twitter as well. That's at Tower Gang Jose, and everywhere else it's No Way Jose. And if you want to support the show the best way you can do that with money over at patreon.com/nowayjose2020. There's a QR code here in the top left-hand corner you can use if you'd like to use that instead. Over there at Patreon, you get access to early episodes at the low level of $2. You get a whole host of other perks as well. I try to keep about 1 to 2 of those paywalled episodes behind there at any given time. We usually keep about 3 to 4 behind the, or you try to do 1 to 2 per week. I try to keep about 3 to 4 behind the paywall on a given time. You also get access to the ad-free RSS feed. You get access to Telegram. You get access to video or to the pre-show, the post-show, and the video calls. Me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead. I also give a big shout out to highest level of my Patreon. Is a big thank you for their support. My previous co-host entire gang at Leonard Toad, also at Red Brigade D, is at ZLVRCK, at _Infinite Zeal, Tim Tuttle, at John and Klebold. Big fan of the show, Torrin May, at Wayne Tagless, One of Her Car for Kids, No Free Lunch, Jack, Mark Vestibule, and Jacob Wintergrad of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. With that, guys, we're going to get out of here. We'll see you on the next one. We'll be sure to do another one of them soon. We'll see you. Bye.